Democrats don't always hold precision in high regard. But Spider ETF investors do. Before investing, consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. Call 1-866-787-2257 for a prospectus containing this information. Read it carefully.
Before the break, I asked you which president made the first televised speech from the White House. The answer? Harry Truman. October 5th, 1947, he went on television to ask the American people to cut back on grain consumption in order to help struggling countries in Europe. Our reactions are pouring in after voters weighed in on some controversial ballot measures. Mississippi voters rejected an amendment that would have defined life as beginning at conception. The amendment could have made it impossible to get an abortion in the state and would have hampered the ability to get certain types of contraception that work after eggs are fertilized. In Ohio, voters repealed a law limiting the collective bargaining rights of state and local employee unions while approving a measure allowing the state to opt out of federal health care mandates. Let's bring in Democratic strategist Maria Cardona and Republican strategist Ron Bonjean. Maria, you first. So why is the defeat of this personhood measure being considered a Democratic victory in some circles?
I think more, Frederica, what would be more accurate is for it to be considered an American victory and a victory for women's health. Because what you saw was all sorts of Americans, not just Democrats, but I think you have Republicans as well, who all believe in a woman's right to choose and the fact that abortion should not be completely outlawed, pushing back against those who believe in that extreme position. And what that extreme position would have done is it would have put a woman's health as secondary or tertiary and really would have, I think, damaged the ability of a woman to make her own decisions even when her life is in danger. That is an extreme position, and what we saw yesterday was Americans standing up and pushing back against those extreme positions.
So, Ron, what's behind the crafting of this personhood measure? It was all-inclusive, as Maria just mentioned, contraception, fertility, cancer treatments, etc.
Right. Well, obviously, that measure was written way too broadly, and the Mississippi voters simply rejected it because, you know, you still had Republicans getting one of their own as governor once again, and you had a voter ID law that passed that Republicans were supporting. So clearly, to me, this shows that the measure was written too broadly, and that not only that, but that this is going to be an economic election, this 2012 election cycle is going to be based upon jobs and the economy and not on social issues, especially ones that are going to be too broad and too encompassing in scope.
So you agree that personhood, you're agreeing with Maria that personhood measure was really kind of apolitical, because when you look at the governor remaining, Republican governor and lieutenant governor in power, that clearly is more of a political vote.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And you see that in other places like, you know, Ohio, where, you know, the unions had a victory on the ballot measure, on their ballot measure, but at the same time, President Obama's health care plan was rejected. It's going to be very difficult to try to nationalize that among Democrats.
Okay, well, let's talk about that Ohio measure then. And, you know, clearly this is a statement that Ohio is making that could have ramifications in other states, especially as this health care mandate from this administration is finding its way in the Supreme Court, Maria.
Right. Absolutely. This was an extremely important victory, Frederica. Again, not for Democrats, not for the unions, but for middle-class families, for working-class families, for mainstream America. I will push back on something that Ron said. I do think that the victory in Mississippi was political because if you hadn't had the Tea Party sweep and thinking that they could own this and pass extreme measures, I don't think you would have had this law written so broadly. They have overreached the way that they did in Ohio, and again, middle-class families stood up for firefighters, for teachers, for public employees, while Governor Kasich and the rest of the extreme GOP tried to demonize public employees when they are not the enemy, and Americans pushed back. Folks in Ohio pushed back.
Okay.
That is what the 2012 election is going to be about.
Well, Ron, Ohioans made another big statement as it pertains to labor unions during yesterday's election as well. Do you think this is contained to Ohio, or might this be a contagion?
I think it's contained to Ohio. Frankly, the unions made this their last stand. I mean, they lost miserably in Wisconsin, Scott Walker's push to reform collective bargaining rights there and to try to get the state's economy back in balance. And that's exactly what John Kasich was trying to do in Ohio, but the unions rejected that. But what's more telling, I think, is for 2012 is the fact that voters rejected, and you're talking now massive amount of union voters voting and rejecting President Obama's health care initiative, which is very telling about a battleground state that he's going to have to win in 2012.
Right.
I mean, that organization was failed to achieve any other results.
But it doesn't do anything. It doesn't
very
practically change anything.
It's very symbolic.
Lady and gent, that's what fair game's all about. Thanks so much. Appreciate
Thanks, Frederica.
your input. All right, up next, disturbing developments out of Iran. Now the country is said to be on the verge of building a nuclear bomb as the regime reportedly threatens street wars against Israel. And right here in the United States. Standing by live, Jim Walsh, who has met personally